I feel it. I really do. This is the beginning of the end for Trump. Or America. I'm not quite sure which, but it's definitely the beginning of the end. This is the mop up. Republicans don't like being called what they are, fascists. It's a bad word. It's a horrible thing to be called fascists, especially since more than 400,000 Americans died defeating them. If you don't like being called fascists, stop behaving like them. Here is Sean Hannity, the personification of authoritarianism, complaining to our Attorney General Pam Bondi, insisting that the people calling Republicans fascists are inciting violence. It's a clever trick. Hannity thinks it's okay for ICE to behave like fascists, inciting their own violence, but when you call this what it is, fascism, you're inciting violence. The violence of fascism, according to Sean Hannity, isn't dangerous. It's correctly defining something as fascism that's dangerous. Why? It's all part of the authoritarian playbook. You cannot call things what they are.
I keep hearing from Democrats, Nazi, fascist, racist, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini. I talk about it all the time. Is that incitement? Is that dehumanization? Do you believe that impacts unstable people and has a causal effect? I have about 30 seconds.
Yeah, Sean, of course it does. It is freedom of speech, but it does. And in the world in which we live, people have to have more compassion. You know, when conservatives can't walk down the street without getting screamed at, they probably couldn't even define a fascist.
Yes, we can define what a fascist is. In fact, I'm looking at one right now. We know what fascism is. We know what Republicans like Trump, Bondi, and Hannity have wrought. Fascism, an undemocratic authoritarian form of government that pushes nationalism, and the supremacy of one race and or religion over all others. Fascism, a militaristic form of government where the individual subsumes their liberty to the power of the state embodied by one man. And anybody who challenges the authority of the country's one true leader shall be labeled an enemy from within. Fascism. That's what this is. That's what Trump is trying to bring to America. To Bondi's credit, she did say calling someone a fascist or a Nazi is protected speech. But that's only because Trump keeps calling our side radical Marxists. And to Trump's credit, he stopped calling our side Nazis. He used to. He stopped because he finally realized calling Democrats Nazis would offend all the Nazis who vote for Trump. Read the group chats inside the Young Republican Committee message boards. Nick Fuentes, a self-described Nazi, was the #1 podcast on Spotify until they took him down. And we know he has a huge following among young male Republican congressional staffers. He dined at Mar-a-Lago. Tucker Carlson, and apparently Tucker Carlson's brother, according to some reports, they seem to adore Nick Fuentes. Again, not all Republicans are Nazis, but all Nazis are Republicans, starting with this guy, Charles Lindbergh. Yeah, Zig Heil, Charles Lindbergh. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thanks for finding me. The Epstein files don't pay my rent, and there's nothing in those files that will bring justice to the victims. What the files do bring are shame and humiliation to Democrats and Republicans, most importantly, Trump. Larry Summers, Clinton's former Treasury Secretary, one of Obama's chief economic advisors, and former president of Harvard, was exposed in the latest Epstein files, seeking romantic advice from the pedophile. Not only that, but Summers was married at the time, and now we're learning that he honeymooned on Jeffrey Epstein's island. This is one of the top conservatives inside the Democratic Party, Larry Summers, a fiscal hawk, balance the budget, live within your means. Here he is putting into writing emails where he solicits advice from a convicted pedophile on how to cheat on his wife. Summers is still married, by the way, to the same woman. This week he announced he's stepping away from public life. He thought he could continue teaching at Harvard. That came to an end. The Democratic Party is now free from Larry Summers, at least in the foreseeable future. Good riddance. According to The Guardian, Epstein told former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers in writing that, quote, Trump is borderline insane, and Alan Dershowitz, law professor at Harvard, emeritus, he said, Alan Dershowitz is a few feet further from the border of insanity, but not by much, unquote. Dershowitz was Epstein's attorney. This is Epstein holding court at Harvard. There's Larry Summers, and there's Alan Dershowitz. Jeffrey Epstein, college dropout, literally bought his way into Harvard, setting up his own offices there. On Tuesday, the House voted to release the Epstein files, 427-1. Good old Louisiana Republican Clay Higgins was the only no vote. Trump signed it into law, but does anyone think we're ever going to see the entirety of the Epstein files? I don't think we will. There's stuff in there, actually, that should remain secret. You don't crowdsource an investigation into pedophilia. The Democrats know that this is just politics. If we had a functioning government, a functioning two-party system responsive to the voters, the top story right now would be Medicare for all. It wouldn't be renewing Obamacare subsidies, which just put more money into the pockets of insurance companies. There never would have been so many Epstein victims if the power dynamics at play had been addressed by tackling income inequality. Every victim's story is a story of inequality. Powerful men taking advantage of girls, teenage girls who come from families that are enduring economic precarity. Former House Republican Matt Gaetz was Trump's first pick for Attorney General this year, but had to bow out after the files began leaking from the House Ethics Committees as well as the DOJ's investigations into his coke-filled sex parties, alleged coke-filled sex parties. Last week, the New York Times broke the story on the chief witness, a 17-year-old girl who claimed she had sex with Gaetz and his cronies so she could pay for her braces. There would be fewer Epstein victims if girls had more options, but predators, men like Trump, Gaetz, Jeffrey Epstein, they don't want girls or women or men to have options because if they did have options, they wouldn't choose Trump, Matt Gaetz, or Jeffrey Epstein. You cannot separate greed from all other appetites. Any man who delights in crushing his opponents, his workers, his co-workers, also delights in controlling, crushing, and ultimately destroying his romantic and/or sexual partners. As they say, character counts. It's a safe bet that a man who turns a blind eye to girls getting abused, not getting a massage from them, just knowing something hinky is happening in the back room or on this island where I'm honeymooning, and you don't report it, you look the other way, you maintain your relationship with Epstein, well, that says everything you need to know about that person and how they will either turn a blind eye to or delight in the suffering of others. It's not good enough for Larry Summers or Alan Dershowitz to say, I didn't partake, or I didn't see anything. You knew. Everyone knew. So, what were you doing there? Your mere presence made Epstein respectable. If you want to honor the victims, raise the minimum wage, free tuition at all public colleges and universities, so a high school girl like Virginia Giuffre doesn't think her only key to advancement is learning massage while working as a spa attendant inside Mar-a-Lago, bearing witness to Lord knows what before getting poached by Ghislaine Maxwell. So you can claim this is about justice for the victims, knock yourself out, but that ship sailed long ago. The Republicans are correct. If this is so important, why didn't we see the Epstein files in 2021 when Democrats controlled the White House, both houses of Congress, and the Department of Justice? Because nobody is supposed to see the files, and I don't think anybody is going to see the files because you know what? It's none of our business. Literally, our business is not doing our own research to figure out whether powerful men are pedophiles. We need and needed a Justice Department that was or is willing to follow this story wherever it leads. But does anybody think that's ever going to happen? We need congressional hearings and criminal referrals, but I don't think for 1 second the Epstein files are going to be released like the Watergate tapes where anyone can pore over what's inside of them. In the end, this is only about the politics of personal destruction. I don't think anyone's going to prison from something inside those files. Maybe. I'm usually wrong, but I don't think so. But what's inside those files will destroy the careers of a lot of people who should have never had careers in the first place, like Larry Summers. And Trump. I'm hoping it destroys Trump. I don't expect Trump to be forced to resign over the Epstein files. That's never going to happen. But I hope there's enough in there to make a third term impossible. So, in the absence of Medicare for All, passage of the PRO Act, a Green New Deal, we are left with the politics of personal destruction. The false hope that once all the bad actors in Washington, D.C. are eliminated, we can finally address the needs of the American people. Not going to happen. But I see nothing wrong with destroying the careers of destructive people, because destructive people destroy people and institutions. Larry Summers, bad guy. No, he didn't break the law soliciting Epstein for advice on adultery, but those emails reflect Larry Summers' complete and utter lack of judgment, his inability to judge Jeffrey Epstein's character, and his own lack of judgment committing any of that garbage to writing. Who puts this stuff into writing? President of Harvard? Seeking advice for the lovelorn from Jeffrey Epstein? The president of Harvard allowing Epstein to donate so much to the university that Epstein was able to purchase his own office space there and create a salon of Cambridge intellectuals? What? So yeah, the Epstein files are important because anything that hurts these people, especially Trump politically, is good for our country. Anything that hurts Trump within his own party is good for America. Anything that hurts Trump with his MAGA moron base is good for America, because a huge chunk of Trump's voters are convinced Trump is in Washington, D.C. for the sole purpose of exposing the deep state's massive web of child trafficking. This is the foundational QAnon myth. Washington, D.C. and the commanding heights of American finance are controlled by child traffickers. That's what QAnon believes. People like Hillary Clinton, they maintain, literally feast off the faces of young children for their life-giving adrenochrome. That's Pizzagate. And Tom Hanks is in on it, which I have to admit is pretty good. Whoever took to 4chan, 8chan, Charlie Chan, whatever Chan to invent QAnon, I know did it to see what's the most insane idea I can convince ignorant people is real. What if I say Hillary Clinton and top officials inside the Democratic Party are running a child trafficking ring, not just for pedophiles? It's got to be something even crazier. What if they're skinning children and wearing their faces, feasting off the life-giving properties of a child's blood? Can I get people to believe that? I can? Okay. What if I add Tom Hanks to the mix? Tom Hanks. Why Tom Hanks? Because Mother Teresa was dead. So throw Tom Hanks into it and see if these idiots will believe that. And they did. They still do. Tom Hanks. I have to admit, QAnon is something my friends and I would have invented if we were clever enough. It's one of the all-time goofs, like getting people to believe Paul McCartney was dead, Elvis is still alive, and that there are 3 Melanias. But I do think there are 3 Melanias, actually. I do. I do. There was a Melania impersonator last year. But if one of MAGA's One of MAGA's pillars is the unbending belief Trump is battling child traffickers, but the Epstein files reveal at the very least he knew about Epstein and did nothing. Well, some of his QAnon supporters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene right now, are starting to have second thoughts about this guy, Trump. They're having second thoughts about Trump, if they're capable of even having first thoughts. Like I said, if government refuses to address the needs of the people, then it's just a cage match in D.C. where politicians find human suffering easy for the public to ingest, then use it as ammunition against the other team, but they're not easing the human suffering. Voting to release the Epstein files isn't governance. We're never seeing the files. It's about revenge. It's about vamping through the midterms so neither party has to make too many promises. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. 2 judges this week raised the possibility of prosecutorial misconduct in the trial of former FBI Director James Comey, indicted for lying before Congress. On Monday, a federal judge had harsh words for beauty queen Lindsay Halligan, the new U.S. Attorney for Virginia. She's the one Trump appointed after no one else would file criminal charges against Comey. The judge on Monday said Halligan had committed so many egregious errors in front of the grand jury that handed down the indictment that the court may have no choice but to throw the entire case out. And then on Thursday, a separate judge, along with everyone in the courtroom, appeared gobsmacked when Lindsay Halligan told the judge she never showed the grand jury the final indictments for James Comey, even though the grand jury signed on to them. The judge on Thursday leaned heavily on Lindsay Halligan, suggesting not only the case against Comey is weak, but could be the result of prosecutorial misconduct as well as vindictive prosecution. He pointed out that no other prosecutors would take the case. Now, vindictive prosecution is often impossible to prove, but the judge Thursday noted a paper trail that Trump has left behind, where he orders top DOJ officials, even on social media, to prosecute James Comey. That judge even went so far as to intimate that Lindsay Halligan is merely one of Trump's puppets. That story will be continued as the Trump revenge tour soldiers on. They're not going to back down. Lindsay Halligan, this attorney, I think she was a third-place finisher in the Miss Denver contest. They don't quit. They know no shame. Trump's new director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency is Bill Pulte, who spends zero time tackling affordability for new home buyers and all his time poring over mortgages attached to anyone who ever did Trump wrong. And then he makes criminal referrals against them to the Justice Department. It's the primary versus secondary residence scheme that he tries to get them indicted over. A lot of moderately successful professionals claim 2 primary residences in order to qualify for lower interest rates on their mortgages, or they'll claim a rental property is a secondary residence in order to secure a lower interest rate on their mortgages. If you're rich enough to own 2 homes or 2 mortgages, you're also rich enough to hire some accountant who does all your financial paperwork, and these accountants usually fudge the numbers, claiming both homes as your primary residences because nobody catches it. And while it's illegal, these accountants figure the only crime you're committing is getting a lower interest rate from the banks. Screw them. That's what the accountants think. And their clients usually just sign the paperwork without reading any of it because nobody reads mortgages, including the lenders. We learned that back in 2008 during the mortgage crisis. Sheriffs foreclosed on properties the banks thought they owned, but actually didn't. Mortgages now are pieces of paper that get traded, and people who take out the mortgages have no idea who they're sending their monthly payments to. The bank gives you a mortgage, and then they immediately sell it. I accidentally ran a toll in Delaware over the summer, $50 that I forgot to pay. It was a fine. Within weeks, I had a debt collector. One notice from the state of Delaware, then they immediately sold that $50 debt to a collection agency because people buy debt. They bundle that debt into securities that people then purchase with no idea what's inside that bundle of securities. They did that with mortgages. They're doing it with traffic tickets, auto loans. Everything now has been commodified. Anyway, Bill Pulte succeeded in getting Pam Bondi's Justice Department to open up a criminal investigation into New York State Attorney General Letitia James, resulting in an indictment. She has been indicted for lying on her loan application. On October 24th, Letitia James, Attorney General from New York State, Trump's nemesis, pleaded not guilty to bank fraud and one count of making a false statement to a financial institution involving her 2020 mortgage application for a home in Virginia. James is accused of claiming that home, she claimed it as a secondary residence in order to secure a lower interest rate. But in fact, according to the indictment, it was a rental property and therefore subject to a slightly higher interest rate. Okay, so she has a home in New York State. She bought another home in Virginia. She claimed it as a secondary residence. The government, Bill Pulte, is claiming it's not a secondary residence. It's a rental property, and therefore her mortgage interest rates should be higher. So all the white-collar crime that needs to be prosecuted, and this is what's taking up our DOJ's time, because Letitia James is the Attorney General of New York State. That's why. And last year, she won a bench trial where Donald Trump was ordered to pay $500 million for defrauding banks and lenders when he lied on his financial statements, claiming he was wealthier than he actually was in order to secure lower interest rates when he refinanced the mortgages on all his buildings. So all these Bill Pulte criminal referrals are about people accused of trying to secure lower interest rates. But that is the crime that Donald Trump committed, to the tune of at least a $500 million fine. It's serious. When you get into the numbers that Trump was playing with, it's serious because banks lend money. And if they think you can pay it back, if you're considered low risk, then your interest rates are much lower. But if you're up to your neck in debt, like Trump, then nobody should be lending you money. And if they did lend you money, it should be at much higher interest rates. Trump, for years, convinced banks and lenders to give him money at lower interest rates, saving tens, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars on interest payments. Eric Trump, his son, kept saying, well, nobody lost money. Nobody lost money. Yes, they did. They lost money. Banks lend money for profit. If they can charge you, let's say, $50 a year in interest, and you trick them into only charging you $25 a year in interest, you've stolen money from shareholders in the bank. It's fraud. I know, who cares about banks? But it's still fraud. Letitia James, the state attorney general for New York, proved it was fraud, proved beyond any reasonable doubt that despite being an enormous risk, Donald Trump was able to secure loans to refinance his buildings at very generous interest rates. And because she won, he was ordered to pay a fine of $500 million. All of that is being appealed. But this is why, and only why, Pam Bondi's Department of Justice is going after New York State Attorney General Letitia James. And Letitia James is only accused of misleading banks to the tune of maybe $20,000. And now they're finding she wasn't collecting rent, that her relatives were, in fact, living in this secondary residence. Well, that trial is supposed to start in January of next year. Letitia James's lawyers say she purchased the home for relatives, not as a rental property. And as I just said, the latest evidence reveals she's collected zero rent from her relatives. Therefore, it's not a rental property. I doubt this is going to make it to trial. Thanks to Bill Pulte, the DOJ has an active and ongoing investigation into California Senator Adam Schiff, who served as one of the impeachment managers during Trump's first trial before the Senate. Adam Schiff was instrumental in shedding harsh light on Russiagate and January 6. That investigation into his mortgage fraud keeps coming up short, but Pam Bondi keeps digging because she says nobody is above the law. Well, yes, they are. If you're digging into Adam Schiff, when you're wasting time and money going after one of Trump's enemies over a couple of $1,000s, real white-collar criminals stealing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars are getting off Rick Scott free. That would be Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, former governor of Florida, who ripped off Medicare for hundreds of millions of dollars. So I say when somebody gets away with something, they get off Rick Scott free, not Scott free, Rick Scott free, who should have been imprisoned. Bill Pulte also made 2 criminal referrals against Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, who Trump tried to fire because she's a black woman. Seriously, because she's a black woman. She wouldn't leave, so Bill Pulte dug into her mortgage, and now Pulte just made a criminal referral against California House Democrat Eric Swalwell, who just announced on Thursday he's running for California governor in 2026. Pulte's letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi accuses Congressman Swalwell of making false and misleading claims on loan documents when he purchases $1.2 million home in Washington, D.C. Congressman Swalwell qualified for our president's enemies list by serving as one of the impeachment managers during the second impeachment, where Trump was tried in the Senate for instigating January 6. Even worse, Swalwell sued Trump in civil court for inciting that insurrection, and Swalwell's civil trial against Trump for January 6, believe it or not, it's still winding its way through the courts. Swalwell, in his civil suit, claims Trump endangered Swalwell's life, along with the lives of fellow lawmakers and Capitol Police. He did that with his inflammatory tweets and speech on January 6, where Trump instructed armed supporters to march down to the Capitol and fight like hell. He knew they were armed, and they were armed. Swalwell is seeking compensatory as well as punitive damages for the emotional distress caused by Trump's negligence and willingness to aid and abet the violence we saw on January 6. The suit also seeks an injunction forbidding Trump from inciting any future riots and or insurrections. That trial remains in the discovery phase and will probably proceed if and when Trump ever leaves office. Now, should the 2026 midterms be a complete and total repudiation of the Republican Party, then I believe that trial will start sometime during the final leg of Trump's presidency. Lawyers for Trump claim this suit violates Trump's free speech rights. They say Trump's First Amendment rights allow him to shout fire in a crowded movie theater, basically. That they say his speech was on the ellipse on January 6th. They said it was protected speech. Well, if I order you to commit a crime, that order is not protected speech. Trump claims to be a huge proponent of free speech when it comes to his speech, especially on January 6th. But he's suing the BBC over what the BBC reporters said about his speech on January 6th. Trump claims BBC's Panorama deceptively edited his speech for a recent documentary to make it look like Trump ordered his followers to storm the Capitol. He did. He ordered his followers to storm the Capitol. But Trump claims that the BBC left out the part of his speech where he told them to go down to the Capitol peacefully and patriotically. Well, yeah, his speech that day lasted more than an hour. And he did tell his goons once to go down there and fight like hell, or you won't have a country. He had Giuliani saying, today is trial by combat. He had former Congressman Mo Brooks in a bulletproof vest shouting, today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass. And Trump told them to fight like hell. And all of them that day knew the crowd was armed. So Trump said he's planning to sue the BBC for $5 billion, claiming their documentary series, Panorama, edited his speech on the ellipse to make it look like his words incited the insurrection. They did. Those words incited an insurrection. And just because he slipped in the words peacefully and patriotically in a 1-hour speech, that doesn't mean he wasn't inciting an insurrection. He was basically saying, I want you to murder your wife, but do it tenderly, with kindness. The BBC's Director General apologized to Trump and then quit, as did the head of BBC News. Trump's not even their president. What's going on here? Why is the BBC caving in to Donald Trump? This isn't ABC or CBS. It's the BBC. There's nothing Trump can do to them, I don't think. So while you have Trump suing the BBC for what he claims selectively editing his speech, you also have Congressman Swalwell suing Trump over that very same speech, accusing Trump of instigating, at the very least, a riot and or insurrection. Trump's suing the BBC, and Swalwell is suing Trump over the same exact speech. Again, if there's a midterm blowout, Swalwell's civil lawsuit will continue while Trump is still in office, because sitting presidents can be tried in civil court while they're in office. And they can be tried after they leave office for anything they did before or after or during their presidency. Now, it gets a little tricky here. Trump delivered that speech while in office, but he was not performing an official act as president. Trump will claim he was, but a special counsel, Jack Smith, pointed out in his superseding indictments from August of last year, those were the superseding indictments that complied with the Supreme Court's July 1st ruling on presidential immunity. Jack Smith wrote, that speech on January 6th was nothing other than electioneering. It was not an official act, as evidenced by Trump taking the stage to YMCA and not Hail to the Chief. I'm not making a joke. Jack Smith said that, and he's right. Seriously. The Marine Marching Band or any military band is expressly forbidden from playing Hail to the Chief or playing any music when a president is performing an unofficial role. By law, Hail to the Chief can only be played at government-funded events. They didn't play Hail to the Chief when Donald Trump delivered his speech on the ellipse, January 6th. They played YMCA. The speech Trump delivered on January 6th, inciting the insurrection, was not funded by the government. It was funded by Charlie Kirk's Turning Point Action. It was funded by Women for America First, Trump's Save America PAC, as well as several other dark money groups, including one that Clarence Thomas's unhinged wife, Ginny, is part of, or was part of. I think she left after January 6th, but she was there on January 6th. Nothing about that Stop the Steal rally held on January 6th, including the $60,000 that Don Jr.'s then girlfriend, Kimberly Gargoyle, was paid. She was paid $60,000 to deliver a 2.5-minute speech before Trump came out on January 6th. Nothing about that day had anything to do with Trump's official role as president. Which begs the question, can you sue an ex-president or a sitting president in civil court for damages over an unofficial act as president? Yes, you can. The Supreme Court in Clinton v. Jones, this was 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that Paula Jones's sexual harassment lawsuit against then-President Bill Clinton could proceed while Clinton was still president because she accused him of harassing her when he was the governor of Arkansas before he became president. The court ruled that a sitting president can be sued in civil court while he's president for anything he did before becoming president. The court admitted that a president is busy, but the president should still have time to be deposed for a civil lawsuit against him. And it was during the deposition for that Paula Jones lawsuit when Clinton got tricked into lying under oath about his affair with Monica Lewinsky. It was a sting operation. We've talked about this. The Supreme Court in Clinton v. Jones and last year in its immunity ruling specifically stated that a sitting president can be sued in civil court for damages unrelated to his official role as president. That January 6th speech on the ellipse had absolutely nothing to do with Trump's official role as president because the Marine Marching Band didn't play him on, the Village People did. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing the majority opinion on presidential immunity last year, specifically said that a president enjoys absolute immunity from criminal prosecution or from a civil lawsuit only for actions taken that fall under the penumbra, the shadow, the protection of an official act. That's precisely why Congressman Eric Swalwell's civil lawsuit has been allowed to proceed, because so far, Trump's speech on January 6 has been seen, at least by the lower courts, as electioneering, which doesn't fall under the scope of official presidential acts. And that is why Swalwell is so despised by Trump, who doesn't rest until he gets even with those who held him accountable for his actions. Trump is trying to get Swalwell on mortgage fraud. As I said earlier, Bill Pulte is Trump's director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and that gives him access to everybody's mortgage. He's the one poring over the mortgages of Trump's enemies, and he came up with criminal referrals for Eric Swalwell, California Senator Adam Schiff, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Lisa Cook, the black member of the Federal Reserve who Trump wants gone because she's a black woman. It turns out, however, that while Bill Pulte was busy dragging Trump's enemies into court this year for claiming two separate primary residence instead of just one, or one secondary residence that's actually a rental property, turns out his very own father, Mark Pulte, was violating similar laws that his son was trying to enforce. Mark Pulte, Bill's dad, violated Michigan state tax law by claiming homes in Florida and Michigan as his primary residences in order to qualify for a major homestead tax write-off. It's called a homestead tax write-off in Michigan. You can only have one primary residence. Nobody knew that Bill Pulte's dad was ripping off the state of Michigan until Reuters earlier this year dug into the Pulte family and uncovered Bill Pulte's father, Mark Pulte's tax fraud, where he claimed two primary residences. And because Reuters dug into the financial dealings of Bill Pulte's father, Michigan tax officials this year revoked Mark Pulte's tax-exempt status, fined him with additional penalties plus interest, which means so far the only person punished for all this primary and secondary residence mortgage chicken shit is Bill Pulte's father. Nobody will ever accuse Trump of surrounding himself with smart people. People like Bill Pulte or Trump's beauty queen, Virginia prosecutor Lindsay Halligan, are precisely why authoritarian regimes are doomed to failure. Only an idiot doesn't know right from wrong, and idiots ultimately fail. They destroy lives in their wake, but because they're stupid, eventually they always fail. That includes Larry Summers, who destroyed our economy by allowing Glass-Steagall to be repealed. But ultimately, they're exposed. This is The Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Please share it and leave a comment. I read all your comments. In August of 2023, Donald Trump posed for this mugshot after a Fulton County, Georgia grand jury indicted him along with 18 others, charging them with running a massive racketeering scheme to overturn the 2020 presidential election results in the state of Georgia. Among the crimes Trump got indicted for was pressuring Georgia state officials literally to change the results, as evidenced by Trump's infamous phone call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, ordering him to find 11,780 votes. If you heard that call, and I assume you all have at least once, then you know prosecutors had Trump dead to rights. Just from that one phone call alone, it defies all credulity that Trump isn't already sitting in a jail cell. But because Trump has at his disposal hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on lawyers, and all that money comes from donors who thought they were contributing money to go into an investigation into voter fraud. They didn't know it would be his legal fees. Because he has all this money, he has been able to delay the Georgia criminal trial. He did last year. He was able to delay it until after the 2024 presidential election. Like Congressman Swalwell's civil lawsuit against Trump for inciting the January 6th insurrection, the Georgia RICO trial technically is still active. It's on life support, but there's still a pulse. Because unlike all the criminal indictments secured by special counsel Jack Smith and then dismissed once Trump won in November, that RICO trial in Georgia constitutes state crimes, which presidents cannot pardon their way out of or put an end to once they gain control of the Justice Department. The Fulton County District Attorney answers only to the people of Georgia, not Pam Bondi. So Trump and his lawyers had to figure out a way to take the trial away from the Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney and move it to the suburbs of Atlanta, where people love Trump because he's a racist. The plan is, let's get this before a jury that is as racist as Trump. So we have an interesting constitutional question at play here. According to last year's Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity, it remains unresolved as to whether a sitting or an ex-president enjoys the same immunity from criminal prosecution in state courts that the president enjoys in federal courts. It's never been tested before. But it was generally assumed until Trump won in 2024 that thanks to the 10th Amendment, state sovereignty, states' rights provide for states to charge a sitting president or an ex-president with a crime if that crime was committed in the state where the charges are being filed. It's also generally assumed, but never established through precedent, that a state prosecutor could probably charge a sitting president or an ex-president with a crime only if that crime wasn't committed under the cover of official act as president. So if a president murders their mistress in Atlanta, or if a president tries to steal Georgia's 16 electoral votes, that doesn't qualify as an official presidential act. So the states, according to the 10th Amendment, should be able to prosecute the president, whether he's an ex-president or a sitting president. That Georgia RICO trial is still ongoing. Like I said, it's on life support, but it can still hear what we're saying and occasionally opens its eyes and asks, what's happening? Well, we'll find out in 2 weeks. If you recall, Trump and his lawyers succeeded in casting sufficient doubt on Fani Willis, the prosecutor who put together the indictment, so that she and her entire Fulton County, Georgia office have now been stripped from the case, which is exactly what Trump wanted. Fulton County is a blue district in Georgia. He figured no jury from in and around Atlanta would acquit him. So he kind of succeeded in getting Fani Willis and her entire office removed from the case. He did this after Trump's lawyers somehow convinced Georgia's state Supreme Court that Fani Willis's relationship with the lead prosecutor in the RICO trial was somehow romantic and improper. Therefore, what? What? I have no idea. They took 2 or 3 vacations together and may or may not have been romantically involved. And because of that, somehow, the state Supreme Court of Georgia took away her jurisdiction and the entire Fulton County District Attorney's Office. They removed the RICO trial from them. Now, Trump and his lawyers figured the case would then be transferred to a Trump-friendly DA's office, of which they thought there would be no shortage of once you got out of Atlanta. The Georgia State Supreme Court then handed the RICO trial to Peter Skandalakis. He has the name Scandal in his last name, Peter Skandalakis, who heads Georgia's Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. It's comprised of 6 state DAs and 3 state attorneys. Skandalakis was supposed to appoint a replacement for Fani Willis. As I said, Trump's lawyers planned for Skandalakis to give it to a red district attorney, a Republican district attorney. But not a single DA in the entire state was willing to touch it this month. So now Skandalakis has to prosecute the RICO trial all by himself. Will he, or will he drop it? He's a Republican. He used to be a Democrat. The judge in the trial scheduled a hearing for December 1st to determine how and if this case proceeds. Some say it's dead. I don't know. Either way, Trump has made a mockery of our legal system, which already was a mockery. The one positive from this is it's now settled law, at least with the American people, that unless it's murder, the rich rarely, if ever, go to trial. To his credit, Trump will leave behind a healthy distrust of prosecutors, the FBI, and to some degree, the police. Running for president, Trump said the system was rigged, and then he proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. Among those still on trial in that RICO case in Georgia are Rudy Giuliani, Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and of course, Trump. On November 10th, Trump pardoned Giuliani and Meadows, but those pardons don't go down to Georgia. And they don't extend to Arizona, where Meadows and Giuliani were indicted last year for their role in that state's fake electors scheme. November 21st is the deadline for Arizona's Attorney General, Democrat Chris Mays, to announce whether she's going to proceed with that trial after it got tied up in the courts over procedural issues. So by the time you hear this, she may or may not have decided whether or not to proceed. This is The Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York. Thank you for joining me. Donald Trump was elected last year primarily because voters said they couldn't afford anything. and because a lot of white people hate women, blacks, Hispanics, gays, and Arabs. But let's just say it was inflation. While the rate of inflation declined during the tail end of the Biden administration, the rate of inflation under Trump, with him back in office, has spiked significantly. Right now it's at 3% and heading up. Last year it was trending down. Trump's economic advisors repeat the lie that tariffs are not inflationary. Even worse, Scott Bessent, our nation's Treasury Secretary, testifying before the House Financial Services Committee in May, he refused to admit American consumers pay the tariffs, no matter how hard Wisconsin Democrat Mark Pocan pushed him on this. In September of this year, Scott Bessent appeared on Meet the Press and again denied, straight-faced, that American consumers foot the bill for these tariffs. Poll numbers show Americans aren't buying these lies because they're buying groceries, which have gotten way too expensive. Last week, Trump quietly conceded partial defeat and dropped some tariffs in order to bring down the cost of grocery items, such as beef, spices, bananas, and he brought down the cost of fertilizer. Really? We have to import fertilizer? With Trump as president, we don't have enough fertilizer here in America? The tariffs have in fact generated some revenue for the federal government because despite what our Treasury Secretary is unwilling to admit, tariffs are essentially a sales tax. In the past fiscal year, which ended on October 1st, Trump's tariffs brought in a grand total of $195 billion. That's a 150% increase over the previous year's $77 billion in tariffs receipts. $195 billion amounts to roughly 4% of what the federal government collects in the way of tax receipts each year. Remember, tariffs are a tax paid for by American consumers. Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, is a liar. The tariffs don't poll well. Nobody quite sees the upside, and the midterms are sooner than you think. This is why Trump promised to send each American a $2,000 tariff dividend check. Sounds good. It's really more of a rebate since we already paid it, but there are several reasons those dividends or rebates are never getting mailed out. It would be nice to get a check for $2,000. I'm sure Trump will sign it like he did that last one when he was president. First, here's why he can't do it. The president doesn't cut dividend checks to the American people. That has to be authorized by an act of Congress. That's the first thing. Second, nobody is sure these tariffs are legal. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of our Constitution states that the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes and duties. Duties are another word for tariffs. Duties. Starting in the 1930s, Congress began passing pieces of legislation that handed the president limited unitary power to negotiate some trade agreements and duties on his own. But it's still Congress that ultimately decides on duties. Unless there's a national emergency. Okay, come on. Unless there's a national emergency, which Trump immediately declared when he returned to the Oval Office, it's up to Congress to negotiate tariffs and duties. In order to justify seizing all these powers from Congress to set tariffs, Trump invoked emergency power. In order to justify seizing all these powers from Congress to set tariffs, Trump invoked emergency powers through an executive order citing the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Congress could theoretically revoke those emergency powers, but not this Congress. While this Congress abdicated its control over tariffs to the president, however, there is still the issue of whether Trump had legal justification to declare an economic emergency to seize those tariff powers earlier this year. Can anyone argue that Joe Biden bequeathed to Donald Trump an economic emergency to justify that executive order? Yes, we all know this economy only works for half the population. But judging by all the yardsticks that measure the economy for half the population, Donald Trump inherited the single greatest economy in American history. Again, that's not saying much for half the people who live here, but he's going to be hard-pressed convincing the Supreme Court that 2025 began with an economic emergency. Then again, this is the United States Supreme Court, 1/3 of which has been picked by Donald Trump. Oral arguments were heard before the Supreme Court on November 5th as to whether or not an economic emergency did in fact exist this year to justify Trump's executive order granting him unitary power to lower and raise tariffs at his whim. Most legal experts who listened to the oral arguments, they all say, except for Judge Alito, the entire court, including Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, seemed to doubt Trump's constitutional authority to raise and lower tariffs depending on what kind of mood he's in. If the Supreme Court rules Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional, then the $195 billion raised so far in tariffs theoretically would have to be returned to the companies that paid those tariffs at point of entry. Yet another reason Trump will not be sending out his $2,000 tariff dividends. Pending a Supreme Court decision as we head into the midterms, Trump's tariffs do remain, and they're raising costs for everybody. The other reason we're not getting that much needed $2,000 check is Trump's tariffs only brought in $195 billion for fiscal year 2025. Now, that's a considerable sum. It's 4% of what the IRS brings in each year. But in order to send a $2,000 check to every American who filed a tax return in 2025, it would cost the government roughly $600 billion. You're $400 billion short, Donald. My suggestion? Forget the Supreme Court. Forget how much the tariffs actually brought in. Trump should just declare that the checks were already sent out, and anyone who claims they didn't get one is a low IQ individual and a liar. And if you're a woman, you're nasty, and a piggy. You're a nasty piggy. This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York. Thank you for finding me and minding me. Katie Wilson, who many call the Zohran Mamdani of Seattle, was elected mayor of Seattle. Ultra-progressive, Wilson began her political career as co-founder and director of the Transit Writers Union, an organization representing people who take the bus and ride the rail. Yes, it turns out they have rights, too. She's an outspoken advocate for affordable housing and workers. I should have said workers and I said affordable workers. We don't want affordable workers. It sounded like I said affordable workers. She's an outspoken advocate for workers and affordable housing. In an incredibly tight race, she appeared to have lost on election night, November 4th, but pulled it out at the end, defeating the moderate incumbent Democrat Bruce Harrell by just 2,029 votes. Close, but not close enough for the automatic recount to kick in. Katie Wilson ran on affordability in a city considered to be one of the most unaffordable in the world. What works for Democratic voters in Seattle or New York City doesn't work for Democratic voters everywhere else. Politically. This is a big country, And we only have two parties, and those parties are coalitions. The Democratic Party under Franklin Roosevelt and LBJ proved democratic socialism works politically. But the Democratic Party at the time was a coalition of Northeastern liberals and Southern segregationists. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal was democratic socialism for white people. Jobs traditionally performed by black people in the 30s were often not eligible for Social Security or unemployment insurance. Black soldiers returning from World War II didn't enjoy the benefits from the GI Bill the way white veterans did. Loan guarantees for black soldiers to help them become first-time home owners were not available the same way they were for white veterans, because Roosevelt was beholden to segregationists in the South. So the New Deal had to be a New Deal primarily for white people. Professor Harvey J. Kaye has reminded us on this show that Roosevelt's vice president, Harry Truman, when he became president, tried to pass a national health care system, but was quickly rebuffed by Southern Democrats who said they didn't want to pay for black people's health care. LBJ's Great Society during the 1960s corrected the institutionalized racism hardwired into the New Deal, or at least it addressed the institutionalized racism baked into the New Deal. And it was during the 1960s we saw democratic socialism tried for all Americans, especially people of color. Medicare, Medicaid. And that's what ripped apart the Democratic coalition of Northern liberals and Southern segregationists. We saw the South very quickly turn to Nixon. And by the time Reagan got sworn in, that old Confederacy was solidly Republican. The Democrats then became a coalition of liberals, identity, and labor. But as money found its way into the system, especially during the Clinton years, the Democratic coalition morphed into a coalition of liberals, rich, hyper-educated liberals, Larry Summers, and then identity, with labor and the working class taking a back seat so far back in the room, they ended up identifying more with Donald Trump last year than Kamala Harris. Okay? That's what's happened now. Workers somehow relate more to Republicans than Democrats. So identity is important, so long as it's not perceived as a zero-sum game, which is how Republicans paint it now. If black people get something, that means something has to be taken away from white people. The Democratic Party can be a coalition of identities and liberals. But if Democrats want a permanent majority, they should study France. I'm going to tell you something that's surprising. Per capita, more American workers belong to a union than French workers. Let me repeat that. More Americans per capita belong to a union than French workers. When you factor in private and public sector workers, almost 10% of American workers are unionized. French workers have a unionization rate of anywhere between 8 to 10%. How can that be? The French are constantly striking. Exactly. French workers are constantly striking, and that forces the government to provide enough benefits and workplace protections so unions don't have to do the brunt of that work. Unions are incredibly powerful in France. Thanks to labor-friendly laws, unions negotiate contracts for entire sectors of the French economy for workers, whether they belong to the union or not. So, because unions are so influential, they can get the entire French working class to go on strike even though the vast preponderance of French workers who are going on strike don't belong to a union. They just happen to be beneficiaries of the union. So the Democrats keep talking about the PRO Act and right to work states and how their hands are tied. We really want to help the working class, but, we got to get the PRO Act passed. And, we're really for the PRO Act. We really are. So we want to help the workers help themselves. That's basically what the PRO Act is about. It's the Democrats not really helping workers, but they say, let's pass the PRO Act so workers can help themselves. No, raise the minimum wage. Forget the PRO Act. Raise the minimum wage. Got to be like the French. The Democrats need to be our union representative. The Democrats need to be the party of all workers. Great health care and solid pensions should not be reserved solely for union members. It should be reserved for everyone, like it is in France. If you're on the side of workers, don't say unions built the middle class. Tell the truth. The government built the middle class, protecting unions while providing for workers. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, a minimum wage built the middle class. Unions helped, but it was government that created the social safety net for a middle class to emerge. Study France. Democrats need to stop saying unions are the answer. Yes, they are the answer, but the real answer is the Democrats, when they're in charge, need to ease the burden on unions, do the job for unions. Healthcare, a pension should never be tied to a union job. If Mamdani succeeds in New York City, if Katie Wilson succeeds in Seattle, that will prove that they can succeed elsewhere. If Mamdani succeeds, the old guard, the Democratic establishment, has a problem because that means democratic socialism. The democratic socialism of Roosevelt's New Deal and LBJ's Great Society, it proves that once again succeeds politically. But Bernie already proved that. Never forget the single most popular politician in America is Bernie Sanders. Not too far behind him is AOC. Nancy Pelosi is retiring, good riddance. Perhaps there's going to be a realignment. Maybe fewer and fewer multi-millionaires worth hundreds of millions of dollars like Nancy Pelosi won't have that much sway over the Democratic Party. This is a big country with big problems, and one of those problems is Donald Trump, who is a symptom of even bigger problems. Trump is what you end up with when Democrats don't disagree with Republicans too much on economic policy. There are too many Democrats, you're looking at Mark Cuban, he's one of them, who detest Trump's style, they disapprove of his stance on abortion, find his rapacious greed actionable. They don't like his treatment of migrants. They think it's distasteful, when in fact Obama was the deporter in chief. These are the Democrats who are billionaires or are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They do not find Trump's economic policy worth getting hot and bothered over. These are the Democrats, that's Rob Reiner, these are the Democrats who destroyed the Democratic Party, the multimillionaires who don't want workers to gain too much leverage over management. These are Democrats who do not want workers to gain too much leverage over management. When big Hollywood producers and studio heads and directors like Rob Reiner are Democrats, we have a problem because they are not on the side of workers. They're management. Which side are you on? If you're management, you're not on the side of workers. Sorry, because this is about money. This is about money. You can like workers, but if you're management, you're not on the side of workers because you don't want to pay them what they're worth. Safe working conditions is about money. Workers die and get injured on the job because management doesn't want to spend money. Which side are you on? George Clooney, Rob Reiner, Robert Iger, the head of Disney. You can donate to the Democratic Party, but you're not on the side of workers. You're producers, you're multimillionaires, you're management. If you're management, you can be a nice person who gets along with the workers, but don't pretend you're on the side of workers when it comes to negotiating their salaries. This is about money. You can say we're all family here and we're all in this together, not when we're talking about salaries, because you do not want to pay them what they're worth. You want as much, if you're management, if you're George Clooney, Rob Reiner, Robert Iger, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Steven Spielberg, all these people who give big money to the Democrats, your management, you want as much productivity out of your workers for as little money as you can pay them. And if you don't want that, you're not good at your job. That's your job, Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Robert Iger, all you Democrats who are so influential in the Democratic Party. Your job is to get as much productivity out of your workers for as little money as possible. And if that's not what you're doing, you should be fired because that's your job. And it is the responsibility of workers, especially unions, to get the most money for the least amount of work. That's the dialectic. That's the conflict. That's the game. So you can like your employees or you can like your boss, but they're not on your side when it comes to money, which is what all of this is about. Money, period. There's no reason workers and management can't get along. But as my father always reminded me, never forget your boss is your boss. He's not your partner, and he's not your friend. You know who calls workers partners? Howard Schultz. He just retired, but he was the CEO of Starbucks. If you work for Starbucks, you're called a partner, not an employee. You don't need a union. Starbucks, by the way, are you boycotting Starbucks? There's still no union contract. They say you don't need a union at Starbucks because we don't have employees. We have partners. You're not a partner in a business that you don't get a share of the profits from. Yes, I know Starbucks gives some employees a little stock in the company. It's not enough. You're not a partner. Walmart doesn't have employees. They have associates. Nobody works for Walmart. You're an associate. Here, my associate, fill out this application for food stamps because we don't pay you enough. You work for Walmart, there's a good chance, if you're an associate of Walmart, there's a good chance you're going to have to go on food stamps. Which side are you on? Management or labor? That's the question Democrats have to ask. You can't be on both teams. Can't play for the Toronto Blue Jays and the Dodgers. Pick a team. This is what the Democrats have to do. We know which side the Republicans are on. They're not on the side of workers. So if the Democratic Party wants to become a permanent majority, you just don't side with the workers. You provide for the workers and take away from management. And tell management, I'm sorry, there's a game here about money. We're all fighting for money. We've taken the side of the workers. No hard feelings. It's a game here. We're going to try to get as much money for the workers. If you're if you're, if you should go to the Republican Party. They're on the side of management. Granted, they're only, maybe 1% of the country, and they're going to lose every election, but that's how it works now. We're the Democratic Party. We're on the side of workers. So you provide for the workers. It's how you have a permanent majority, and eventually the billionaires who are not that bright. Bill Gates was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. How smart could Bill Gates be? They need to learn that taking care of workers is actually taking care of capitalism. Wall Street is suddenly warming to Mamdani. Jamie Dimon, the pig who runs J.P. Morgan Chase, is going, well, maybe I need to listen to Mamdani. Mamdani met with Trump today. I don't know how it went. But Wall Street is suddenly warming a little to Mamdani. It's for the same reason unions love Mamdani. If you take care of the workers, you ease the burden for unions and corporate America. If the government provides universal daycare, which is what Mamdani is going to try, if you create affordable housing, free transportation, that makes life easier, not just for the workers, it makes life easier for unions and the billionaires, because you're not paying for it. Well, you might have to pay slightly more in taxes, a little more. But as I say to my Republican friends, don't you want to pay a little extra in taxes so everyone has health care and you don't have to worry about any of those rent boys you bring back to your apartment having untreated infections? Don't you want the rent boys you bring home that your wife doesn't know about? You don't want them to have untreated infections. Don't you want the people you have sex with on the DL? Don't you want them to be able to go to the doctor so you don't end up infected? Doesn't that make sense? Steve Bannon is absolutely right when he says the Democratic Party is run by global elitists. What he leaves out is so is the Republican Party. He's one of them. The Democratic Party has to be on the side of workers and poor people, and they can no longer pass the buck to unions. We have to do what they do in France. The whole world will be watching Zohran Mamdani. He gets sworn in January 1st, 2026. Now, he can't be president. He wasn't born in America. But if he succeeds, and I think he's got the energy, charisma, intelligence, youth, the fire, I think he's going to succeed. If he succeeds, American voters will once again be reminded that human decency can't be commodified and that dignity is owed to everyone, not just those who can afford it. And that Medicare for all benefits everyone. Medicare for all benefits everyone, including the rich, because when everyone can see a doctor, Republican men don't have to worry about getting infected by their rent boys. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. Please share this episode. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Share, leave a comment. Help me out. It's getting harder to find this show for some reason. So please get the word out. Thank you.